We'd like to welcome everyone to our Global Innovation Readiness webinar series. This is our fourth session on facilitating virtual teams, and look forward to welcoming my co-host, Thomas Arend, International Product Leader and Innovator at Global Minds Network, with our guest speakers, Matt Ferguson, Vice President of Innovation Services at Xinova, as well as Moti Margalit, who is a lead innovation facilitator and country manager, Israel, at Xinova. So we're in for a treat. We're going to enjoy insights from Thomas Arend, as well as a case study and more insights from Xinova. So we'd like to welcome you to this Global Innovation Readiness webinar series. And why we started this is because of the dynamic world that we're finding ourselves in, this sort of changing, turbulent world that requires new models and frameworks. So we thought it would be timely to take a look at how to innovate and collaborate around the world. And we have put together a series of 6 sessions, actually, from May 21st to June 25th. So we're on our 4th right now on facilitating virtual teams. And we have 2 more left on global innovation culture and global transformation and readiness. So make sure to join us. It's every Thursday here at 5:30 or starting at 8:30 in San Francisco. We're from Thomas City, in Seattle as well. And 11:30 New York City, 4:30 London, and 5:30 here in Paris, and 21 hours in Bangalore. Very late over in Beijing at 11:30. So I don't know if anybody's up still. So a couple of tips before we get started for the readiness journey. All of you are with Zoom webinar by now, so you have the Q&A tool for questions, and then the chat for any comments, feedback. And just a quick request, say hello and share a greeting in your local language to make sure you can hear the sound okay, and let me know if all is well where you are in the world. So I say bonjour from Paris. And let's see where we have people calling in from. Atlanta, Bangalore, namaste. Great, from Hungary. Great, okay, so it sounds like the sound check is okay for everyone. Just quick yes, you can hear me well, loud and clear. Okay, looks like we're good to go. Okay, so we will move forward. And so Global Minds Network, who are we? I'm Karina Jensen, I'm the founder and executive director of Global Minds Network. And our vision is really about inspiring global minds to collaborate and innovate in order to really create positive impact in the world. And we do so by facilitating global innovation and multicultural collaboration in order to ensure or accelerate organizational performance and market success. Our team is an international advisory network of international leaders, change makers, innovators who share this vision and mission. We really bring expertise at the intersection of global innovation, multicultural collaboration, leadership, and digital transformation. And we share this framework. This is the webinar series is really based around this framework of 3 key levers or success levers: vision, global compelling vision, through inclusive leadership and strategic co-creation. And that also shapes the dialogue for the team in order to facilitate knowledge sharing and cross-cultural learning. And that in turn shapes the space in nurturing a global innovation culture and creative team climate. So we see that as a continuous circle in today's project and team-driven environment, so moving from concept to market. And the aspect that we'll be looking at now is really around global and virtual teams. And from our combined research and expertise, we've really found that what's driving global and virtual team collaboration today is really the around social networking, knowledge sharing, and cross-cultural learning. So looking at how These courses really help optimize the collective intelligence of your teams across the world. So to provide some insights here today, we're going to start by taking a look at global virtual teams. So how to innovate and collaborate virtually. And I'd like to invite my collaborator, Dr. Thomas Arend, and whom I introduced earlier. He's an international product leader and innovator here at Global Minds Network, brings extensive experience in leading teams around the world and innovating from SAP to Facebook and Google and Airbnb. He's worked for many leading companies, and today is the Senior Product Director of Digital Health at Johnson & Johnson. So I'd like to invite Thomas, who's going to join us live here. And I'll stop sharing the screen so that we can enjoy a talk from Thomas.
Wonderful. Karina, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm so thrilled to be here, and it's so exciting to see participants from all over the world. I thought in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to, like my experience in driving innovation in collaboration with virtual or distributed teams. And what I have to say is going to be shockingly trivial. So everyone on this call is going to say, sure, yeah, that's like, of course. What I did find though is through my years of experience, just like collecting those thoughts and kind of making conscious decisions in small and large, I'll give you some examples, makes a big difference. And just being aware of those choices that you make and introducing those as your hygiene almost around working with remote and distributed teams. Now, the current situation is a very specific one because many people are forced into like a virtual setup. So that's an interesting aspect. I'm going to talk about this, but also a little bit about the time before and maybe a future. So for me, collaboration or innovation in distributed teams has two major aspects. One aspect is management and the other one is collaboration. I'm not going to go into too much depth into this, but I think it is important for people to understand different roles they play. I have a different responsibility if I'm a team leader, if I'm a manager, than I have if I'm a collaborator. Not saying that team leaders are not collaborative, but saying that there are different team roles, and I'm not going into the detail here, but it is important to understand how leadership styles, think of situational leadership, change once you work with a distributed or virtual team. For me, when I started thinking about this, that was at times when we all were in offices. I thought I was managing teams across 3 different time zones in the US and Europe and in Asia, India mostly. And I thought about this a lot, like how can I make sure that we all work together well and that we all like achieve our goals? And then I looked at, so my presentation is going to be very analog, no slides, but you'll see my hand drawings, so here they come. So I thought about this in this way to say, hey, if I'm in an office with someone, and how often do I actually run into people? How many interactions do I have? So I have the number of encounters here and the number of the distance from my desk here. In this super precise and highly scientific graph that you see on your screen, I was wondering, okay, what, like, maybe you would think, okay, well, if I'm like miles away, then of course the number of encounters is lower. And I thought, what does this curve look like? I did some of my own research and read up on this, and I thought maybe it's a straight line, maybe it curves a little bit. So this is what this curve typically looks like, which basically means that the number of encounters drops dramatically, like with even like a very short distance. And this is, again, highly scientific, but so in like open office spaces, a current assumption is that this cutoff line where it's almost 0 is 90 feet, 30 meters, roundabout. So if someone in your office is 30 meters away from you, it's almost as if they are in a different country in a remote office, because you don't typically run into them, have like any chance encounters. That to me was kind of blowing my mind. Now, again, not exact science, but what that did to me was to inspire like ways to figure out, okay, what do we actually need in my own office, even not even thinking about like remote setups. So companies I worked for, like Airbnb, Twitter, Facebook, what they do to kind of lift that curve is they install micro kitchens and water coolers, but they distribute them in a way that many people have to run into each other when they get water or coffee or snacks by design. So that kind of enhances, that kind of moves this curve up even with distance as floor plans spread out. I'm saying that mostly to remind people that that's something that you can create virtually and online. How do you create a virtual water cooler? How do you create a virtual micro kitchen, a place where people go, where people have to go to run into each other? Next thing I want to talk about real quick is virtual meetings. We are on a webinar, we are all used to video conferences these days. It is important to figure out the cadence of those meetings, and also whenever we go back to normal, the right mix between face-to-face meetings, group meetings, one-on-ones, and also some unscripted meetings, the virtual water cooler. Could there be just an open connection? At Mozilla, we had just almost like a window like installed, a big screen in the kitchen, which would connect to a random office location in the world. So if I were to go grab some snacks, I would see other people grabbing snacks somewhere around the world and have a chance encounter in a casual conversation. How can we create this structure? For actual meetings, again, here comes the super obvious part, but one that's often overlooked. So I'm really obsessed with having meetings with a clear structure. No meeting without an agenda, no meeting without meeting minutes. Even local meetings that are not virtual oftentimes forget about that. And they are beautiful frameworks that you can use. One very phony one is phone. So you go into a meeting and you have a very basic meeting structure: purpose, history, options, next steps, and exit. I think exit is only there to make it like sound like a word or something. But what that means is basically just, if you have no structure to your meeting, this is a good one to say, why are we here? What problem do we want to solve? How did we solve it in the past? What are the options that we have on the table? What do we want to do next? Action items, and then exit, like follow-ups and planning the next meeting. Again, I warned you that this is going to be shockingly trivial, but simple structure like that helps with your local meetings, but also with your team meetings. And RACI, everyone has seen this: responsible, accountable, and so on. So really understanding team roles and understanding who on your team plays which role for which project. That seems a little bit like a little much, especially for small projects and small teams. Unbelievably helpful if it's clear who is on the hook, who is accountable, or who needs to be informed about a specific step in a project. A simple Google spreadsheet does the trick with names in it and with projects. Lots of templates online. And when it goes back to real meetings, one thing that works well for me is if you have, say, a majority of a team in one room, and then you have people dialing in from other locations, especially teams dialing in from other locations, give them an ally in the room. So someone in the room who makes sure that they are being heard, that their questions are being answered. Talking about communication technology, communication is key, obviously, not telling you anything new, as I said. Innovation, I'll get to that part, but especially collaboration is heavily based on communication, all those cation words. And if you look it up online and you figure out what's good communication technology, you find that it should be simple, reliable, and accessible. Great. So I did a little trip into like history of communication, and I thought, how did people communicate, or how are people communicating in the past? Well, what I found was, oops, can you see this at all? So smoke signals, great. So I can communicate with someone. Oh, and this is communicating over a distance, pardon me. So this is obviously, I can talk to people or make a drawing, but what if I'm not there? So this is a fairly old technology, I would say, that people used. I don't know how to use smoke signals, but I guess it did something. And then I guess the next step up was this, a carrier pigeon somehow taking a message from A to B and connecting people. Still not super real time, isn't it? Huh? And then the next step from there is this guy, an actual letter being taken, like physically, a physical thing that gets taken from A to B, takes 2 weeks to get from the US to Europe, and then another 2 weeks to hear back. So also not really super real time. Oh, here comes a real time tool, the telephone. Pardon my drawing skills. This is my sketch for an old style telephone. Great, so this is real time, but I can't see people, but that's like still fine. Phone conferences are still a thing for many companies. Oh, and then obviously the next step up, video conferences. That's what we are right now. So seeing people on video, almost like you're really there. You hear them, you see them, you can talk to them, you can talk to multiple people. Amazing. So what's next? What already exists, let's take that video equipment and put it on a robot. Again, my drawing skills aside, but that technology is like 10, 15-year-olds. They don't exactly have legs, but that's my artistic rendering here. But basically just taking a laptop or a screen with a Skype at the time client and making it move around. So then what's next after that? Augmented reality, virtual reality. I can have meetings in 3D, seeing people around me by wearing these silly looking glasses, and technology is going to help us make those look like real glasses in the next 5-ish years. All major vendors work on smart glasses. And what comes after this? Any Star Wars fans, the hologram. No technology needed. I just see the person around me, projection directly into my retina. However that stuff works, I don't know. Telepresence. The interesting part that I wanted to mention is, and that number shocks some people, which is 80%. 80% of our communication is nonverbal. So if you're on the phone, or even like right now, we see people's heads nodding, doing things. I don't see your bodies. I don't need to see your stance. I don't see if you have that nervous tick with your right leg going up and down because I'm pushing against time and I only have 5 minutes left. So this is the part that's important to fix. Like, how can we get this nonverbal communication in? I did a really interesting exercise for leadership a while ago, which was about setting up a tent. So here's how this exercise went, and this for me was a good way to understand how working with remote teams works and doesn't work. So here's a tent that needs to be set up, and there's a circle around this tent, and only people inside the circle, let's say we have 3 people inside the circle, can set up the tent. The fun part is they're blindfolded. They can't see what they're doing. And they have a group of people outside. Those people can see, but they cannot touch the tent or get into the circle. So those people can see everything. They can give directions. Those people who are right by the tent, they can touch the tent. They set up the tent. They do all the work. But they don't see what they are doing, and they are 3 people, they have to coordinate somehow. So what happens is these people have all the insights and knowledge. They tell people what to do. Instant frustration ensues on both sides. These people think people in the circle are idiots because they're not doing what they say. People in the circle feel micromanaged and get super frustrated because they can't see the full picture. They don't know if this is an igloo tent or a tent that looks like this and what the big picture is, because those guys are not sharing. This is what I've been in for so many years with headquarters, like throwing stuff over the fence to remote locations, having them build stuff without giving them the big picture, and remote controlling. So this is so real. If you ever get to do that exercise and build empathy that way, I strongly recommend it. Quickly, I have a couple more minutes.
We actually are at 15, Thomas.
What's that?
We're at 15. We're almost at 15 minutes.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm wrapping up. So super quickly, lots of super useful frameworks. This is a framework that Facebook uses to build products, understand, identify, execute. Happy to tell you more about that. Lots to find online. More frameworks. I did not actually mean to walk you through, but just to show you an interesting graph. They are frameworks of deciding which products to build. So have a good portfolio process. About figuring out impact versus effort, and then really defining where you want to put your bets. So the key is here, agree on frameworks, stick to them, share, and then brainstorm is the last part that I wanted to say in my -2 minutes that I have. The brain is a fantastic tool. It's so optimized for pattern matching and pattern recognition that we get stuck with the existing that we have, and it's really hard to get out of it. What I recommend is IDEO brainstorming rules. There are a bunch of great things, including a box that looks like this and has 51 ways to brainstorm. You can do that with the remote teams. I'm not being paid by them. Lastly, create what I called a memory palace. There's actually a technique that's called memory palace technique. So when you're in a brainstorm, this is me in Japan in the brainstorming session, decorating the room with sticky notes with my team. What happens is, if you have a physical space, people will remember the next day that idea that Joe put in this corner in the back, because we have an amazing 3D memory. That's how the memory palace technique works. Recreate that online. If you have virtual teams that are supposed to work on a project, give them ideally a 3D. If not possible, then at least an online space that resembles a place where people can go back to and locate ideas. Global teams are awesome. I love tapping into differences and not trying to use the same process for everyone. That's all I had for today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thomas, for highly interactive, entertaining, insightful presentation. Really covered a lot of considerations as well as some frameworks. It's just wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I would like to introduce our guest speakers. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Matt Ferguson, Vice President of Innovation Services at Xinova, and Moti Margalit, who is I would say, lead innovation facilitator and country manager at Xinova. We have a close collaboration. Global Minds Network has had the opportunity to develop an online training facilitation or innovation facilitation training program for Xinova for their global network. And I'm fascinated by their services. They have an impressive global market network of 12,000 innovators that span across 113 countries, and created a unique methodology in order to ensure collaboration between innovators around the world and to create valuable solutions for their clients. So we are lucky to get a look. They're going to share their insights and their approach. And we'll take a look here at Xinova. So let me upload for you. We're ready for you.
Great. Thanks, Karina. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting us to participate in this webinar today, Karina. I appreciate it. It's nice to see you again. You may recognize a few of the slides in this presentation because some of them you helped co-create, actually. So it's been fun working with you and thinking more about how we can leverage the strengths of the innovators that work with Xinova from around the world to help deliver new insights for our clients. And so today, Moti and I are going to co-present this. We've worked closely together for a number of years now too. I'd like to start just by giving everybody a little bit of a flavor for what we do at Xinova to provide some context, and then we'll talk about, Moti will talk a little bit about, how we think about ideation. So Thomas mentioned IDEO. I think there's a lot of really interesting things that they've done, and we offer sort of a alternative, complementary approach to innovation and thinking of new ideas within the context of research and development. So Xinova helps companies, and this is our statement in a nutshell, really. What we do is help companies create, evaluate, and demonstrate innovation. So we like to look very early to develop new ideas, but within the context of understanding that no one has the time or infinite resources to take every idea that sounds good on paper forward. And so innovation really needs to be grounded in results at the end. Next slide, please, Karina. So who are we? As Karina mentioned, Xinova leverages the efforts of a global collective of 12,000 plus innovators, some of whom have been around the company longer than me at 4 years plus, others who engage for a single project and then move on to other things. We're a small company, fewer than 50 employees, but we do have a global presence. And I think the way that we do that is by figuring out how we can leverage and work with virtual teams. So we look to deliver solutions that help our companies transform their businesses from offering new technologies and strategic thinking. And some of our customers you can see over there, ranging from food and beverage, consumer packaged goods, engineering, and science. So really looking at a huge diversity of industries. And again, the only way we can make that work is if we can efficiently use talent from around the world and across different disciplines. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Xinova works to help our clients across the innovation spectrum. So ranging from providing strategic consulting services, looking at how can companies identify possible sources of disruption 5 years out, how can they plan? We have a number of experienced senior leaders within the company who have helped big technology companies plan and really look ahead and think about how our cash flow is going to be changed by future advances in technology, and how can we actually be one of those forces that is disrupting rather than waiting for a young startup to take over for us. So, we offer that strategic vision and focus. We also do a lot of work around helping companies leverage current technology trends or forward-looking advances to help develop new products or look at strategic problem solving with a focus on agile methodology, looking at outcomes, that can be evaluated quickly and iteratively. And so building value without investing in huge long-term projects, but trying to be nimble and focus on, advancing through a stage, evaluating what needs to be done next carefully, leveraging the right resources to move forward, rapid prototyping, et cetera. And at the end, the short time turnaround end, we also, sometimes companies just need help getting a question answered from the right expert. So we also offer sort of on-demand access to our network of experts to help companies learn, help companies move faster, develop those insights that they need to make decisions about, which projects they want to start in the first place, which markets might be interesting for some of their existing technologies, things that they haven't thought about. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you just a quick overview of some of our product offerings, again, to provide some flavor. So I mentioned that one of the services we offer is called Map Design Build, which involves really taking a deep dive look into the customer's ecosystem and identifying all the different various cash flows, right? What is the value chain within that industry? And by actually doing a bit of cartography, by looking at where all the cash moves, it provides a really insightful sort of 30,000 foot view of an industry. And then we work with folks who have the sort of deep expertise to think about, okay, looking at where technology trends are heading, which of these cash flows are vulnerable, and where do we have opportunities to either anticipate disruption or actually be the force of that disruption. Next slide, please. So in a nearer term sort of innovation horizon, one of our services called Rapid Innovation Session, which we'll talk a little bit more in detail about as we go forward, is focused really around virtual teams of innovators, assembled to help a customer either solve a technology unlock that's preventing a product from moving forward or a process, or looking at a new product offering. And we use structured innovation methodologies that Moti will describe in a little bit more detail, and an agile approach, so that we are very quickly and engaging customers at the right time to get feedback and develop new ideas. And so we'll share more about this in a little bit. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then finally, as I mentioned, one of our service offerings is essentially on-demand access to the right experts. So quick turnaround here, the idea being if your team, everybody's teams are fully loaded typically. We all have so many projects to do, and oftentimes it can be a challenge to allocate the right time to do some of that critical thinking about an opportunity that looks like a good idea but may not be the #1 priority. Maybe because there's just not quite enough information available to the team to make that decision. So the idea behind this is that, if you can connect with the right expert that already has experience in that field, they, with a short amount of time, can provide you an incredible amount of insight, also if they have the right framework, so that you can make those decisions more quickly and ultimately get more projects advanced in your own pipeline than you might be able to do otherwise. And so our value in this case is through being able to identify that right expert and provide them a framework, manage some of the sort of transaction of just finding the right person and then making sure everybody's aligned on the right outcomes, so that you benefit as a customer from receiving that insight with relatively little effort. Next slide, please. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague Moti, who will describe a little bit more about the methodology behind the rapid innovation process and how we work with virtual teams. Moti, you're still on mute.
Thanks. So
teamwork right there.
Thank you, Karina. And to tie what Matt was saying about Xinova into the topic that we're looking at in working in regard in virtual teams, I think that Thomas really addressed the two most important things. One, have a framework, and second, communication. It's these two critical elements that enable any endeavor. And especially it's critical because imagine we have a problem, which is typically a very hard problem. The company that is using us hasn't been able to solve it. We're creating a team, typically globally, from around the world. Most often they haven't ever worked together. And in 2 months, we are expected to provide great solutions. So it's a very big challenge, and it's a venture into the unknown because, let's say, unlike an engineering project or even an expert where you ask someone to do what he knows how to do. Here we're asking them come up with something new. So we are really pushing people to the boundary. Our network is built of people who like to be at the boundaries, but still, it's very difficult to have people do this and function as a team. The key to this, framework and communication. The way we structure it, and here just a brief comment and criticism of brainstorming. This is not a brainstorming session. Brainstorming is typified by something short, well structured, but you come, you throw out a bunch of ideas, and then you act on whatever you want to do. we're looking for something a bit deeper. We're looking for this, for the people to function as a team, not just break out the paradigms, but really function as a team. And the way we structured it, and we follow the agile methodology, which says do everything in short sprints and a lot of feedback. So we came to this because we recognize that many times when people have a problem, they have some concepts of their problem. When you tell that to someone, again, a communication problem, but when you explain the problem, then people have ideas how to solve it. They come back with the ideas. The ideas are not really what the problem originator was thinking of. Maybe he didn't phrase the problem well. Maybe it was lost in translation, or maybe it's, you know, by the time, especially if it happens over months, the original problem is gone and other problems arise. So the way we structure it, we start with a problem definition, which is typically given by the customer, so the team can hear it from the customer's mouth and ask questions. Then a structured ideation period. It's designed to be around 2 weeks, where we find that 2 weeks is the ideal period for things to incubate. We don't want the first idea that you have. We don't want ideas that the team members come from the outside. We want the team to go through a phase of exploration. That's when they build up their capabilities as a team. And then ideation, where they use structured ideation techniques to really map out a lot of potential. This is where teams really bring benefit, and I'll explain why we work in teams in this 2 weeks period. After those 2 weeks, we have a concept presentation. We typically aim for around 10 high-level concepts. We put each one on a slide and show that to the customer. Now the customer says, oh, this is exactly what I was looking for. That's great. Or the customer says, nah, I wanted that in green, not in yellow. So we understand we're out of scope for the customer. And then there's always the ambiguity. Well, potentially additional ideas can come out because the customer may have additional questions or whatnot. After the feedback, we go up and write a solution report or a research proposal or whatever the customer was looking for. And as I said, this is 2 months and results in a very novel and out-of-box ideas. Next slide. To sort of put this in context in the real world, so this is like a real case study. We had a customer where the scoping workshop, which is when the interaction between the inventor team and the customer took a week. It started as a workshop, and then at the end of that week, the team came back to the customer with a bunch of questions and answers. And essentially that started the solution sourcing. They're looking for solutions to that problem. As I said, using structured methodology, we go from we reach the concept presentation, show the customer a bunch of high-level concepts, identify what's in scope, what's out of scope, and then go on and write up those solutions. At the end of the 8 weeks, the customer selects a couple of solutions, and in this case, we also have the option of using our network to realize proof of concept prototypes. Many of our customers, just for them to run a small project can be a major endeavor. Just the signature path of going up and down and getting the allocated budget, subcontractors in place, NDAs, all that can be a big hassle. So we sometimes structure a project where we add on a proof of concept. So some of those selected solutions are then realized as prototypes or proof of concepts, or we get some additional data to bring it to the level where the customer can now take it in-house and go to the next. Next slide. So the first question is, why work in teams? I mean, get a genius and solve your problem. There is a good, and many of our people in the network can meet that criteria, but still we get more from the team. And why do we get more from the team? So first of all, there's a commitment. if the facilitator builds up a commitment between the team, now it's not just the accountability, but the fact that we are in this together helps us push through. So, you know, the innovation, we all want that eureka moment, but innovation is typically a lot of hard work. We try to ignore that. Edison once said most people miss opportunity because it comes dressed in rags and looks like hard work. It is hard work. And the way to bridge and go through hard work is working in a team and creating that commitment. So even if the team is now lapsing, there'll be one guy or girl who pushes through. Another thing in team, and this needs to be managed well, not to get out of hand, but have some healthy competition inside. You know, some people are very quiet, but if the guy or girl next to them says something, then, you know, now they'll be motivated to voice themselves, and there's some healthy competition, which again pushes people forward. And finally, because we're typically addressing multidisciplinary problems which have been addressed well in the past, so we pull resources. Not everyone knows everything, not everyone has the time for everything, and most importantly, also luck. I mean, this is another joke. Someone told Napoleon, you know, winning a war is a lot an issue of luck. So Napoleon said, well, bring me the lucky generals. Next slide. To have teamwork, and I'm just reiterating what Thomas said, framework is super critical. You can't have a team and say, bring me ideas. That doesn't work. You need to tell them how they're going to do. You need to structure simple tasks that are going to happen. And from those simple tasks, ideas will come. But telling people, and this many times happens in a brainstorm, okay, give me your good ideas, don't hold back, just go with it. It doesn't really function if you want to dive into something. So having a framework, using systematic innovation techniques is very effective. The second and very important aspect is having an innovation language. We tend to ignore that innovation has a language. Some people use trees, but there are other innovation languages. You need to instill innovation language. The same way that chemists talk chemistry, mathematicians talk mathematics, innovators need an innovation language. It means how you manipulate the current situation to get new stuff. By having an innovation language, you can understand what I'm doing and I can understand what you're doing. Building an innovation language is by using a structured innovation technique. And essentially structured innovation techniques, be it trees, be it SIT, be it other techniques, are about carefully mapping a situation, going through a situation, looking at all the options, and finding potentially interesting options. Because we are pattern matching machines, we tend to cling to the first thing that comes into mind. By systematically going through many options, we open new opportunities. The way that IDEO and other companies structure innovation is they try to break your patterns. An alternative method and more systematic is simply look what people have done in the past, try to implement it here. That's the innovation language and the way you work as a team. A very important issue and something that I've not yet found a really good solution, we use some tools, but here I think there's a wide area for innovation. It's tools for idea accumulation. Because the problem is that many of those ideas are not really good, but they can be the basis for something new. And what happens typically is that only a couple of ideas permeate through, and no one really pays attention to all the stuff that's thrown to the sides, all the connections, all the interconnections. It becomes very complicated very quickly. And here I think more work can be done. Rina, next slide. So we have two case studies. I'll give the first one, Matt will give the second one. And I just want to sort of bring to us the high-level stuff I was talking earlier. So in the lithium metal batteries, essentially it's the next gen batteries, so that and the problem there is that over time there tends to be a short circuit, so it limits the amount of cycles and can also lead to fire and other hazards. We're working for a company that was doing research into this, so it was not an immediate product, it was something in the horizon, and they had a lack of research, quality research proposals. I mean, the guys internally were doing the same stuff over and over, year after year, and they wanted us to come and propose alternative approach, new ways of solving this problem. We had an international team, people from Europe, from USA and Israel, me. What we did is we had an initial scoping call with the customer. We did a lot of research because it's a very crowded topic. And then we essentially used what I call a mapping technique. So because it's relatively, the scope of the problem is not so large, you know, there's so much you can do on the material side, there's so much you can do on the architecture side, so much you can do on the, let's say, assembly side. We simply went through all the possible things you can do, crazy or not. And then after we went in a structured way, we had, for example, we thought, okay, let's put in this material, but we don't know how. So now we have a concrete problem to solve. If we have this material in the composition, it will solve the problem. Let's think how we can actually implement it in a battery, in production. What would be the challenges? What would be the research focus of this item? And from that, we came up with like 10 ideas or 12 ideas that we presented to the customer. That was the high-level concept. The customer liked 4 of those, and we wrote them up as research proposals, and then they went into their internal research activity. Next slide, and over to Matt.
Thanks, Moti. So one more example. This is another innovation session that we did for a food and packaging materials company. And the challenge that they faced is that, you know, when you make coffee cups, when you make milk cartons and other containers, especially with food contact, there's so many difficult, or not necessarily difficult, but there's so many factors that have to be considered, ranging from the performance of the package to the food contact, food safety. And there's a lot of regulation involved in this industry as well. And a lot of the materials that work incredibly well also happen to either the material itself or the process to produce it generates a fair amount of CO2. And so there's regulatory pressure to move away from polymers and plastics for a variety of different reasons, even though they work quite well for these particular applications. So the challenge here really was, you know, our client understood that they will very soon, if not already, be facing increasing regulatory pressure to replace the plastic layer that keeps your paper coffee cup from getting all soggy. And what they're looking to do is you know, addressing this concern, trying to find solutions that move away from fossil polymers, but it's very difficult for companies in this position to make any sort of sacrifice on performance, because that's what consumers demand ultimately. So what they wanted from us was to look for possible solutions to this that would still provide the right sort of barrier against water from permeating that coffee cup, but address that solution without using plastic. And the goal of this this part of the partnership was to do the ideation work in a similar sort of context to the example that Moti described, but then take that forward into proof of concept and demonstration of the ideas. So we have a sort of a couple of stages within this partnership. The virtual team that addressed the first phase was composed of folks from the US, from Europe. We had one participant who has a long storied career within the paper machinery industry, has invented a number of different concepts that are used all around the world in paper mills. Another is a professor of analytical chemistry in Italy. We had an organic chemist, consultant participating from Georgia, and a few other folks as well. So it's really a global team. Nobody that participated on this project outside of the Xinova folks, had worked together before. And we, over the course of this process, engaged with the customer to sort of leverage. And I think one of the things that Moti highlighted that I really like about this process is, bringing people from outside customers' industry ends up generating a lot of very interesting discussion at the beginning, as folks who, what happens is the sort of assumed knowledge of the industry gets challenged by people who just don't necessarily know the same shorthand or haven't already sort of compartmentalized in their head what works and what doesn't work. So that exercise of scoping is very interesting. And then as the team sort of gets to know the customer, and as the customer is able to sort of see the progress happening and solutions start to come through, as they weigh in and share which ideas they like, which things are promising, you start to see a sort of rapport develop between the innovators and the customer team that I think is really interesting and a nice feature of this process. So ultimately, the goal of this project was to select solutions to move into proof of concept development. And the team developed or sort of suggested about a dozen or so different ideas over the course of our ideation phase. Ultimately, there were two sort of new codings that the customer, that met the success criteria that the customer established at the beginning. And so those have advanced into prototyping. And this project is actually sort of still underway. So it's been an interesting experience of being able to have face-to-face meetings in combination with the virtual ideation work that the team does. And then as the coronavirus started to evolve, now we're entering the POC phase when it's very difficult to actually, for some folks to even access their laboratory facilities to do proof of concept work. And so it's been an interesting experience for us. And I think the proof of concept project that's being developed right now on one of these codings is a very sort of globally distributed virtual project as well, as we've had to find the right resources for testing and analysis. We're sending samples all over the country, in order to kind of make that work. And I think overall, it's been great experience to sort of see how the tools that we've put in place for dealing with the virtual engagement and how to keep teams and customers as well sort of aligned virtually. We're sort of seeing some of those frameworks play out now in this new environment, which has been really great to see. So I think that was my last slide. Let's just make sure. And then we're happy to open things up for questions. Yeah, so just thank you again, everybody, for the invitation, Karina and Thomas, and for all of you participating in the audience. I think we wanted to leave some time for questions, and we're happy to open things up. I'll hand it back to you, Karina, first.
Karina, you're muted.
My bad. Can you hear me now? All right. Thank you again, Matt and Moti, for a very insightful presentation and wonderful examples on how we can facilitate innovation and collaboration around the world virtually, especially with your methodology. And I have a question for Matt. From Lokesh Venkataswamy, how do you bring the right people for the project out of 12,000 think tanks? Can you share more thoughts on your request for invention, how to prepare for these think tanks? So.
Yeah, it's a very, it's a good question, and it's a mix, really. I think it's a mix of knowing talent, the right folks for a particular project. I think there's also an element of opportunism to it as well. So one thing that I mentioned, I think early on, is sometimes there's a balance between using folks that we know and trust that can deliver, and finding new innovators who can bring something valuable to the table, and I'm sure would be somebody we would grow to trust. So we have internal tools. First of all, we have a fair amount of internal knowledge from building this network that we work with over the last 5+ years, and software and other tools that we've built in-house to help us stay in touch with that group. And then a lot of it too, I think, is having a sort of close network of facilitators like Moti, who we do trust to leverage their own networks to bring into a project. So, I'm, as a project manager, or someone on my team, oftentimes we're not solely responsible for selecting a team. We rely on the facilitators who are going to lead those projects, and who we've worked with and invested sort of time and resources into, to help suggest the right person for a given project too. But building that team and identifying that chemistry, it takes a little bit of time. So it's something that we work on, as soon as we realize that there's an opportunity with a customer, we have to start thinking about how we're going to deliver against that.
And another question, what do you feel is the strength of your methodology for facilitating virtual collaboration and innovation, for open innovation? Is there a particular strength? Or?
Yes, let me take that. I think our strengths, and here we differ from other approaches, is that we believe the customer does not always know how to phrase his questions well enough, and rather than leaving it at battling with him with endless questions and answers, and we find that sometimes people do scoping, and it can be months until they actually understand the problem, and everyone is frustrated from that stage. On the other hand, customers want very quickly, to see some results. Okay, show us what your great team can do. So the way we structure it is 2 weeks of opening up with the customer presenting his problem. We have a methodology to guide them and to present the problem in a way that opens up opportunities and not closes them. But still, it's the customer responsibility to present that. Then the facilitator knows how to translate that into something that the team can work on. And then the team has the opportunity to ask questions. And after the questions are asked, we have the 2 weeks of ideation. And I think this 2 weeks of ideation is something that's not so common. It's not so common in let's say, one of our customers remarked, if we had implemented it on our engineers, it would be great, but typically our engineers are all the time running from meeting to coordination to Zoom. They don't actually have an opportunity to continually discuss a problem over 2 weeks. There's so many interruptions in between. And then a 2-week ideation period becomes something protracted over several disparate brainstorming sessions that happen over several months, and no one really knows the context. So by keeping it focused, 2 weeks, concept presentation, the customer gets a good understanding of what we offer as solutions. We get a good understanding if this is in scope or not. And if it's totally out of scope, we have another go at it. So this is the agile aspect of it. We look at how software design, which again is very similar because the problems are very big, very complex. And if you want to launch a new website or whatever, it's impossible tasks. So you build it up into short sprints, and you have well-defined tasks and well-defined activities throughout those sprints, and you meet again at the end of the sprint. Don't try to come up with miracles. That's very difficult and very frustrating for everyone involved.
Okay.
And I think that's really what sets us apart. Of course, we're not the only guys who are doing these kind of things. Designers do it in their methodology regime, software developers do it in there. We do it in the space which blends, let's say, what sets us apart from design is that we have a very deep technology understanding. So we are really doing design at the technology level. We can come up with a new material, a new way of using an existing material.
Thank
we
you,
understand
Moti.
the chemistry, the physics, the mechanics, the electronics, whatever.
Great. Thank you. We're on the hour, so I just want to make sure there was a question for Matt as well, and then I have a question for all of you. So I'm asking our audience to stay a minute or two, and just in closing, so we can ensure this question is asked. From Monica Zikova, a question for Matt. How do you map out the skills, knowledge, and capabilities of your experts and collaborators? Do you keep a skills repository of some sort? So I don't know if you can answer that in less than a minute, but
the answer is yes, actually. Okay. We do. We have a internal platform where innovators self-identify and fill out their own profile. And then that's matched with our team's experience in working with those people and others where we have it. So it's sort of like an internal LinkedIn, but more focused on, the things that we care about within innovation specifically.
Great. Okay, so a final question for all of you. There was a question for Thomas, so I'll bring it to all of you because there was a question from Jeremy Solomon. What's the value of water cooler encounters versus texting for teams? So I think I'll bring that to all of you just quickly. What do you think is the future? Is it virtual, live, or a hybrid? So what?
I think there's no either or. It's a mix, and each has its own advantages. And the water cooler just is a way to tap into informal conversations that otherwise you would not have. It's unstructured, and it's like a way for chance meetings. And 9 out of 10 of those meetings will be useless. And then in the 10th, you might get some information or have some inspiration. That's how I see it.
Okay. Moti and Matt, any thoughts? Is the future hybrid, live or online? Or?
I think I'll give my version. I also think, just to add to what Thomas said, part of the value of the water cooler conversation is the chance encounters with people in a team that you wouldn't normally work with, but that are working towards the same goal. So for example, when we've worked actively with a software development team, it's not necessarily part of my day-to-day, but it's super interesting and useful for me to talk to them about how they see the way we can make our services better, and then we can sort of cross-collaborate. We've used text-based versions of that, like Slack, where there's more sort of channels or teams where you have that ability to interact with folks that aren't on your team. And I think that's very helpful personally. I'm curious to see if there's a virtual sort of face-to-face version of that could be developed in the future.
That's great. Okay. Moti, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's well, Matt phrased it well.
Okay, I'm going to quickly share screen just to remind everybody under 1 minute. Whoops, so we're gonna fast forward very quickly before we say goodbye, just to remind everyone, and a big thank you again to our guest speakers, Moti, Margalit, and Ferguson, for a wonderful presentation and insights on the future of collaborative innovation online through their global market network. And we look forward to co-creating solutions with you. Again, please feel free to contact us around these services of information, webinars, training, audits. You have our contact information there, and for more resources on the book and the test tool. And join us next Thursday, June 18th, for our next session on creating a global innovation culture with my collaborator, Dr. Finn Meilergaard, Global Leadership and Change Leader, and our guest speaker, Dr. Elvira Meyer-Comte, who's the Vice President Head of HR at Airbus. So it should be an interesting case study. Again, thank you. A big merci to everyone, and enjoy the journey, the global readiness journey. Stay safe out there. And thanks again, Tomas and Moti and Matt.
Thanks, Karina.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.